DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at the Necromanteion. Dive deep into this dungeon designed for the dead. So, the Necromanteion, what are you getting? This is an adventure module designed for 4 to 6 level characters, 4 of them, and it should take you about 3 to 6 hours to complete. It's designed by Jason Bakos, and it's $2.95 in the DM's Guild. What are you getting? What is the kind of adventure you're getting, though? Well, it's basically your classic dungeon delving adventure. You dive into this tomb, this sacred shrine, this relic of bygone eras, actually modeled after the real Necromanteion in Greece. The kind of rituals that performed there and how they were speaking and talking about the dead are even mentioned in the adventure module itself, which is a great little kind of tie into real world mythologies that you don't often see in adventure modules like this. It's nice to see where the author picked those ideas up and kind of give him a good idea of kind of where the inspiration for these things. Most players probably won't even ever look at this, but some players might, and some GMs will really like and appreciate the extra attention to detail. But I digress. The actual module itself is really well done and really well put together. Everything seems to flow really well, and it has a really great, kind of impactful start. You start out flowing down this river that's supposed to kind of represent the river Styx in a way. You kind of move down it, and eventually you come across a group that's being accosted by something. You give chase, and at the end of that chase, depending on whether you decided, I'm not gonna, follow this thing, or I managed to catch it, you end up at the Necromanteion. Diving deep into what you find out very quickly is a demon-infested hell hole, with demons abounding everywhere, monks running scared, and you're the only thing that maybe stopped them from completely corrupting this place. And so you dive in deeper and are presented with a number of challenges. Not just the demons themselves, although there are plenty of those, a couple even from the New Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, but also other things. The temple itself has challenges abound to thwart and stop the player from getting further. At first it's like minor things, little damages, but other things it gets more tricky. You must perform certain rituals, and at a certain point, you must make a sacrifice of some kind. Now, what that sacrifice is, I'm leaving out. Let's let the players discover that on their own. But it's interesting to note, it would be interesting to see the playtesting results of what happened in specific chambers as a result. Finally, when you completed your quest and your task, you may perform the ritual to speak to the dead, as the Necromanteion of old was designed to do. So, on to what I liked about this adventure. I really liked the rituals. They're very evocative, very thought-provoking, very interesting from a player's perspective as to how they ground themselves into the world and to the lore and into real-world rituals as well that the Necromanteion is based on. Each one passes you further and kind of has you working out how these behave. Yes, you can bypass some of them by being very clever, but oftentimes you must perform the ritual as intended. And there's one point in there later that you do have to perform the ritual as specifically intended. I also really love the idea of the maze. He's created an idea that I think mazes really suffer from in D&D. You can't really have a maze. It's like, well, you just roll a survival check or wander around the map until you found your way out. Well, kind of. He presents it as a skill challenge, a different way of looking at mazes. Essentially, if you try and go forward, unless you beat the skill check, your speed is 0. It doesn't matter how big or small the map is in that case, you can save a lot of space that way. And means that you can effectively give the impression of wandering a maze without ever having to actually have one. I also really love the consequences. There's not so much a problem of if you make a wrong choice or a right choice, but some of the things you do or don't do have effects on what happens in the overall narrative of the story. It gives it a more realistic idea. It's not a case of there's a good and a bad ending, but there's just endings. Stuff happens. There are multiple players. There are multiple actors in this thing that are kind of all vying for whatever their goal is. It's not so much that everyone is against the players and everyone who isn't is kind of on the sidelines. Some are kind of trying to do other things, other bits and pieces that mean that they're trying to kind of subvert certain aspects of the player's path, but not necessarily directly. I also really love the initial chase scene. It's a really great way of bringing players into an adventure. It's not so much, you've met at a tavern, here's a missive, here's a thing. No, you've right into the action, here's a thing, here's this horrifying flaming creature you need to chase down because it's killing things. A really great way of starting out an adventure is on a high, and then delving deep into a terrifying hellmaw. So, on to what I didn't like about the adventure. And there's only two things, really. One, there's a couple of weird little formatting issues in terms of the descriptive boxes that seem to get split in half and moved to other sections. That's a minor thing. And that's just more of a tiny little pet peeve. It doesn't actually hurt the adventure overall. But the other thing is that the map itself, it's a nice little, inked, hand-drawn map. And it works really great if you do Theater of the Mind exclusively, or you have a live game and you just need it to work out where people are on a battlefield. But for virtual tabletops, things like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, it suffers a bit. I need that higher fidelity to keep my players engaged. There is something about sitting in front of a computer that players are so goddamn tempted to open Google and browse 9gag. Jesus. But so that's why I need that extra fidelity, that full colorness, that extra kind of I'm explaining there's a body here and there it is on the map and you can see it. Here's a library and they're covered in books and there's the books, you can see them. And this is what this character looks like and all of this kind of extra handout stuff that really brings a game to life. It's not a case of that there's anything wrong with the map, it's not suitable for my purposes. So, on to the rating, which you've all been waiting for. We're going to use my perk system again, so that's Polish, Exploration, Roleplay, and Combat. And we always start from last to first. So, Combat. Combat in here is pretty much a standard fare. There isn't anything super challenging or difficult for a player to overcome in terms of environmental effects. Stuff that you would expect to see in more higher level adventures or in more unique low level encounters. There is one point where there's an environmental effect that maybe the players could take advantage of if they were very clever. There are also points in the combat where if something specific happens, the enemies might surrender. And that's more of a role-playing thing rather than a combat thing specifically. There's not anything that I would say, this is something to write home about, or this is wow, that's a really cool in addition to a combat encounter. It's more of a case of, these are creatures, and they're designed to kind of block you from your path. So for that combat, I'm going to give it a 4. There's nothing terribly exciting, but it's a really great set of encounters overall. Now, on to roleplay. Roleplay is much stronger here. There's a lot of NPCs to interact with. There's a lot of creatures to interact with. In fact, the final thing you encounter has a really good roleplay opportunity. What will your players do at that final thing? I think a lot of DMs will wonder. They might see some shifts in dynamics, especially in parties that are more neutrally aligned. Maybe that lawful good paladin ends up dead because he didn't agree with the rest of the group. It's very possible. But I digress. The roleplay is really well done. There's a lot of very good, well fleshed out NPCs to kind of play off of and kind of do things with. And there are a lot of extra little things that can happen as a result of players doing or not doing things that mean that it really brings that roleplay element forward. There are points when a sacrifice must be made that I can see some really great roleplay coming about. And in addition to that, speaking of the sacrifice, all of the other trials really evoke that kind of very good role-play experience. It's a really well done job from Jason there. So I have to give it a 5. Now, exploration. Well, it's a dungeon delve, so there's not a whole lot to explore. However, saying that, there are also little nooks and crannies, and there are points where you can change or shift the story completely. There are points where if you go one way or go another, something different happens, something changes. There are creatures that are not quite aligned with the main enemy, but are also not quite aligned with you, and they affect various things across the whole adventure. It's really good to see that kind of idea. There's also opportunity to go further, to go into places that your players might not make it out of, for instance. I'll not say any more there, but just to say this, that there's a portal somewhere and it doesn't go anywhere nice. So for exploration, I'm going to give it a 4. There's not enough there to kind of like really branch out or really go ape and see the universe. But there's enough there to kind of keep a player's interest who's really looking for that exploration, really looking for something that they want that bit out of. So finally, polish. Polish is a tricky one here. What I'm talking about with polish is that things like included maps, map files in separate files, also included things like handouts that would always be nice, images, formatting, all of that kind of stuff that makes it a nicer adventure. Now, the map itself is serviceable, but like I said, it doesn't suit the purposes that I need it for, so I'm docking a point for that. In addition, there are some minor formatting issues that I talked about earlier, one of the things I didn't like, but I think those aren't major enough to kind of warrant any kind of demerit, but they are worth mentioning as a kind of a polish piece. It would have also been nice to see some extra handouts or kind of like when you're talking about interesting and unique magical items, it's always nice to have a handout. And I create those for my players because I know it really brings them in. So for all the DM's Guild authors out there, handouts are a really great thing to add. They add that extra level of polish. They're not something you should focus on, but if you're kind of going through the adventure and trying to build it out and as you kind of like completed everything else and you think, well, what can I add to make this thing just that little bit nicer? Add a handout for an important magical item, or maybe like a monster. If you have this unique monster, try to get it drawn specifically for your adventure and include it in the module. It's a really great thing to do. Now for my score, I'm going to give it a 4. There's a lot here and there's some really great formatting and there's some the map itself is really well done. It just doesn't suit my purposes. And it doesn't suit the general virtual tabletop crowd. So I have to take a point off for there. So what does this give us as total? We've got 4 for polish, 4 for exploration, 5 for roleplay, 4 for combat. And so that gives us a total of 17. Divide that by 4, you get 4.25. So on the DM's Guild, I'll be rating this a 4. Now, I really like the adventure, I really like the structure of it, and it has some really great roleplay elements, so there's no reason you shouldn't pick this up. I'm not rating it a 5, not because it's not a great adventure, but because there are things that mean that it could be better. But I think that's always going to be true. It's really difficult to be a perfect adventure. Thank you, and if you like my videos, you like what I'm doing here, you like the channel, and you kind of want to just see more things from the DM's Guild that you're not necessarily exposed to, leave a like, comment, subscribe. And if you disagree with me, comment down below. Just tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I got this off the mark. I'm always willing to listen. Thank you, and peace out.